And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth, and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven, and devoured them.
Hey guys, I hope you all enjoyed your holidays and had a good start into the year 2025. Today, let's read the last part of chapter 20 in the book of Revelation. The only prophecy yet to be fulfilled is the gathering of the army, the final battle against the saints, the subsequent resurrection of the dead, and the judgment of the world. The word Armageddon occurs only once in the New Testament, in Revelation 16 verse 16. The word is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Harmageddon. It is intended to describe the place of the final battle and means mountain of those gathered, as an allusion to Mount Zion, or destruction of their army, or a gathering of kings. Magedon does not refer to the small hill in Israel but, as always, to the plasma volcano at the North Pole. All the biblical locations of the real Holy Land at the North Pole were given new assignments on other continents. In this video we will look at what the final spiritual war against the saints, Armageddon, might look like. And it's going to be a wild ride. You'll see that World War III, a hostile alien invasion, Project Bluebeam with the false messiah and the zombie apocalypse are just different aspects of the same agenda. The main agenda in Satan's little time. And as always, these are speculations, these are just ideas. All of Lucifer's agendas in his little time, all of the deceptions he has built, are aimed at mobilizing people into a war against the saints. Philosophies, doctrines and cosmologies that hide the saints of Zion and hide the demons that are in control here. Arming the earth with the worst weapons that ever existed here. The unification of all peoples under one rule. The control of all people in every respect, down to the biological and spiritual level. Everything was necessary to prepare for the coming war of all wars. The whole thing seems to culminate in a grand finale. The battle between heaven and hell on earth. If the floating city of saints is the source of the magnetic force of the North Pole, or rather the crystal protected in it, then its movement is perhaps the reason behind the pole's shift. The magnetic North Pole has been shifting for over 150 years. First towards North America, where, interestingly, it made a U-turn around 1831 and is now moving faster and faster in the opposite direction towards Russia. To be precise, Siberia. Since 2020, it has literally been racing towards Russia, as the increasing speed of the shift since the 1980s has accelerated even more since then. What if, at the end of Satan's little time, the floating city lands in Siberia? How could he get humanity to attack it and wage an outright war against it? It would only work through deception, his standard mode of operation. So let's try to follow Satan's train of thought. You would first have to establish the idea in people's minds that there are large floating things populated by humanoid beings with supernatural powers. These humanoid beings would have powers that dwarf anything we know. These people would seem very strange to us, you could say alien. They could fly, jump far, move objects by the power of thought, perhaps even hurl lightning bolts. Now the idea of flying cities has to be planted in people's minds. For example, by permanently exposing all the peoples of Earth to the idea of large spaceships or motherships from an early age. Flying cities from other worlds that attack our Earth and importantly naturally want to do us harm. As soon as people are familiar with this idea, even expect or subconsciously wish for the real arrival of such ships, the flying city will also be interpreted in this way. This mind control technique is called predictive programming. The perceptual filter of the entire population has been permanently altered by the constant exposure to certain images, so that in a moment of shock the mind automatically falls back on the familiar associations that provide support in a moment of stress. So the New Jerusalem, the holy city, will come down from heaven and, presumably, land on earth. Will it open its gates and invite worthy people to come there? As this video here clearly alludes to? Take a look at this promo video by the popular band U2.
extreme heat.
It has declared a drought emergency.
In the promo video, large reflective spheres appear in the air spaceships in several locations around the world.
Numerous calls and text messages in the past hour all seem to confirm sightings of something very, very unusual. An unidentified object about the size of 3 football fields has been spotted over the skies of Belfast. Now, some of the reports are saying that they can hear music emanating from them.
Where are we?
Well, we're not in Dublin.
What is that?
This Super Bowl commercial advertises the new Sphere Arena in Las Vegas. It's basically a giant spherical screen. In the last video, I suggested that the New Jerusalem could be a flying sphere. These images from the Middle Ages show reflective flying spheres that are associated with God and Jesus. Officially, this is the abstract way in which people back then graphically depicted the God-created universe. But I can't help but think of the UFOs from the U2 video. Sphere or cube? Others also suspect a pyramid shape. This would give the Eye of Providence a new dimension. Is it the New Jerusalem hovering above the rupees Niagara? Whose all-seeing eyes watch over us? Annuit coeptis, he favored our undertakings. Who knows? They could make us hate this symbol on purpose. Okay, so if the New Jerusalem, the camp of the saints, leaves the North Pole and comes to Earth, and if we are living in Satan's little time, which I assume we do, where Satan is deceiving the nations in all 4 corners of the earth and gathers them to battle in numbers like the sands of the sea, how could he attack the New Jerusalem? A principle of deception says, if you want to hide something but can't make it disappear, you have to create a mass of distractions in which it gets lost. How do you create a big enough deception and distraction that makes all of humanity misinterpret the gigantic New Jerusalem and perceive it as something other than what it actually is? This is where the most elaborate and most important secret program for Lucifer will be used, Project Bluebeam or Project Firesign. According to this black-budget military program, gigantic holograms can be projected into the sky for psychological warfare to deceive the enemy. If you combine the arrival of the New Jerusalem with highly realistic, gigantic, satellite-based holograms, the illusion of the hostility of this floating city becomes even more credible. Project Bluebeam was first revealed in 1994 by Canadian journalist Sergei Monast, who first introduced the program to a wider audience in the book Project Bluebeam, NASA. After publication, he received the usual three-letter agency treatment for 2 years. First, they destroyed his reputation, then they took his daughter away from him, and finally put him in prison. In 1996, he and his co-author died suddenly of a heart attack under strange circumstances. He paid for the revelation with his life. According to him, a global elite is planning a large-scale religious psyop. The project is to take place in 4 phases. 30 years later, we are long past phase 1. It's probably not advisable to talk about every step on this platform, but you can read them here. The first phase deals with the narrative control of archaeological finds to destroy religious views. Movies are also used as a means of propaganda for this purpose. After the preparation of the first phase, religious images are beamed into the sky as holograms in phase 2. These will trigger a religious war. This phase is about transhuman nanotechnology that connects the brain with AI and the Internet, also known as the Internet of Bodies. Completely crazy in 1994. But today, after all the revelations about what happened 4 years ago, I think the stage has already been set for this phase. The final phase. A mixture of electronic mind control, supernatural powers, holograms, and a staged invasion will plunge humanity into a worldwide military conflict leading to a global takeover. Back then, almost nobody believed him. And today, everyone knows the TV show Ancient Aliens. UFO sightings regularly appear in the mainstream news. Ex-presidents talk about it. Supernatural auroras can be seen in our latitudes, and AI is no longer a science fiction topic. Apart from the fact that hologram technology has made gigantic leaps. In 1994, there were no smartphones with cameras, internet connections, and apps for the public. Cell phones were simple. Only texting and calling other people were possible. And there were fewer mobile phone masts in towns and villages. The internet was also different from today's internet. Google didn't exist yet. There were almost no web stores on the internet. It was a different world, with less high-tech and gadgets than in today's world. People in 1994 may have perceived Project Blue Beam differently when they read about the 4 steps of the operation. Back then, it was something very strange and too far-fetched for many. Today, in 2024, the things described in the 4 steps of Project Blue Beam are no longer so crazy, and may even be technologically very possible. The Benenson Strategy Group then sent this PDF around internally in 2016, and it eventually ended up on WikiLeaks, and has since been deleted. Several large projects are being discussed. One of these is Project Firesign, which aims to, quote, create an awe effect in hostile populations to produce an instant psychological soft kill, desperate submission, quote end. Lasers will be used to create realistic images in the sodium layer at an altitude of 100 kilometers. They are said to be hundreds or even thousands of square kilometers in size. Quote, the trauma induced by Firesign will provide ample cover for governments and NGOs who will provide aid, so psychotropic drugs to induce docility, and counseling services that will ensure further domestication, quote end. Similarly, ELF waves stimulate certain areas of the prefrontal cortex, which also become active during spiritual experiences. Reference is also made here to the Sanguine military project, in which research was conducted with ELF. Fascinating, the document even explicitly mentions massive floating cities descending. Voice-to-skull technology is also used to reinforce the illusion of a superior force. With this satellite weapon, low-frequency sound waves can be sent downwards over a large area, which can penetrate the top of the target's skull in such a way that the sound is perceived as if it were being produced in the head. This means that voices can be projected into the heads of the population. It is a fact that this technology has been around for over 30 years. Here is a long list of patents for all the technologies with which voices can be generated in the head via electromagnetic waves. To believe that it has not long been used experimentally on unwilling victims to study its psychological effect on as many different types of people as possible is simply extremely naive. As early as 2007, Wired reported on US weapons that produce voices in the head and can be used for psychological operations. This one got buried in the algorithm. But do you remember this sick ad campaign for a horror movie in 2007? Here, in New York, elaborate loudspeakers were hung next to an advertising poster and directed at the sidewalk in front of it. Pedestrians walking along the sidewalk suddenly heard ghostly voices as if they were in their heads or whispering in their ears right next to them. It was never used again, the media hardly ever reported it, so I think it was one of the tests of the technology.
I had to get my girls to have a look. It's not your imagination. What's that? Who's there?
The thousands of victims of V2K technology are not just making it up. They are the guinea pigs for Project Blue Beam. Havana Syndrome is finally bringing the issue more into the mainstream, but of course only because they can blame Russia and not have to admit that US intelligence agencies have also been able to use these weapons for decades and of course have been doing so. Mostly on their own population. In 2010, Wired even reported on the Face of Allah weapon, which can be used to create the face of God as a hologram in the sky to force the enemy population to surrender. In this article by The Guardian from 2000, the weapon is described in a hypothetical scenario. The face of God appears as a hologram in the Baghdad sky, and microwaves of 5 to 15 kHz are used to create voices in the enemy's head. They even mention the airborne hologram projector, which we will come back to. The result: the enemy kneels down and puts down his weapons. They literally unveiled Project Bluebeam here, but because it was aimed at the current political enemy, people didn't realize that in the eyes of the planners of these weapons, we all are the enemy. The God hologram really isn't a new idea. Military analyst Bill Akin wrote about this concept back in 1999, which described it as holographic image of Allah. According to a military physicist given the task of looking into the hologram idea, the feasibility had been established of projecting large, three-dimensional objects that appeared to float in the air. Akin wrote. He continues, but doing so over the skies of Iraq? To project such a hologram over Baghdad on the order of several hundred feet, they calculated, would take a mirror more than a mile square in space, as well as huge projectors and power sources. And besides, investigators came back. What does all look like? This Washington Post article mentions how the planning for this project began in 1990, and even mentions that this super-secret program was established in 1994. Exactly the year Sergei Manas wrote about it. The article refers to a 1994 Air Force paper on future military technologies. As in the previously mentioned NASA paper, it is explicitly about the year 2025 and imagines a holographic projector mounted on an airplane that generates realistic holograms of other airplanes in real time to deceive the enemy in war. The CIA pilot and whistleblower John Lair made this paper, which is now extremely difficult to find, famous because, according to him, these technologies are not technologies yet to be developed in the future, but technologies that already existed in the top-secret black-budget military sector at the time. And according to him, this plain hologram projector was already being used in 2001 to deceive the masses.
And I expect any day to hear that he's passed away. He's 87. And I said, Norm, I said, I'm thinking that the airplanes that crashed into the World Trade Center were holographs. And he said, John, you're probably right, and here's why. He said, just before I retired, I was driving down on the Bayshore Freeway to Sunnyvale, and he said I had a friend in the right seat of the car, and he says, like it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, maybe 8:15. He said, we're driving south, and we saw this shadow, and we looked up, and here, he says, it wasn't a 747, but it was a huge 4-engine airplane. It wasn't 200 feet above us. And he said, we looked out and looked at this thing, and he said, of course, we're 20 miles from San Jose, and 30 miles from San Francisco. There's no possible way an airplane could, legitimately be flying right there. And he says, we watched it for about 10 seconds, and it went just like you turned a light bulb out. And he said, if that was the contemporary holograph presentation of a holograph, he says, then you're right. And the holographic technology is so far advanced that people just wouldn't believe it. But the other day I had a lady here that was helping Marilee on a casting program. Actually, she hired Marilee. She was from New York. She had 2 degrees from Harvard. She was just a wonderful, smart, receptive lady. And we were talking about holographs. She says, well, let me tell you. She said, about 5 years ago, I was invited with about 15 other television executives into a private showing in Hollywood. And there was a little auditorium. It wasn't very big. It could seat like maybe 30 people. And the presentation was called The Future of Television. And she said, I don't remember if Steven Spielberg was there, but everybody else was. And she said it was brightly lit, and there was a stage and a podium on the stage, and we're sitting there, and this guy comes out from behind, and he's a kind of East German accent, East European accent, white hair, has glasses, and he comes out and he starts telling us the history of television and how they came up with the first cathode ray tube, and how they did this and how they did that, and he's walks down in front of the stage, walks up one of the aisles, he's polishing his glasses, walks back up to the stage, and she says it was pretty boring. She says after about 20 minutes, he wraps it up with something, and that's the history of television. He puts his glasses on, and just like a light.
He disappeared? He was a hologram?
Yeah. And
wow.
That was 7 years ago. So that's what television is coming to, is you won't have a screen.
Right.
You'll just turn it on, and it'll be happening right there.
It's right there.
Could something like this also be used to simulate the illusion of an extraterrestrial threat from the air? Holograms and sonic weapons for psychological warfare and religious manipulation are no longer crazy theories, but formulated strategies of the US military. And I think these technologies will be used to make the city of Zion appear as a galactic enemy that can only be defeated if all of Earth's military forces can be mobilized together against this enemy. But first they must mobilize Jesus Christ, and the saints of Zion to act. To get them out of hiding, so to speak, in order to be able to attack them. In this context, I find the recent statement by UFO researcher Stephen Greer very interesting. You can think what you want of him. I think he may have revealed a truth here that he doesn't fully understand.
Werner von Braun said to her, what we're going to do, we're going to hoax an alien threat to consolidate sort of a totalitarian power around the world, because it'll be so frightening to people. They will give up their freedoms, and they will, et cetera, and so on. We have to have an interplanetary war and Armageddon so Christ will return. And now I'm quoting, and I went, excuse me? And it turned out he was the major funder for a far extreme group at the Vatican known as Opus Dei, and was very devoted to this idea that Christ will only return when enough of the world is destroyed, enough of the population is destroyed, that it forces the return of Christ. So I'm there just listening politely going, WTF, right? What? And then I realized that there's a component of this group that are like that. And then there's another component, and this is the chief mentor for Luis Elizondo, that honestly are Satanists who love destruction, love torture.
The origins of this agenda go back much further than the early 1990s. Stephen Greer has already mentioned it. Werner von Braun was one of the German scientists smuggled from Nazi Germany to the US by the CIA in Operation Paperclip at the end of World War II. They and their families were promised immunity from prosecution if they offered their services to the USA forever. They were particularly interested in the German rocket scientists, who were the best in the world at the time and celebrated considerable success with their V-2 rockets towards the end of the war. One of them was Werner von Braun, who immediately began building rockets in the USA. Between 1959 and 1972, he made a career at NASA and became one of the most famous and important figures of the time. From 1973 onwards, he struggled with health problems, and towards the end of his life in 1976 he was nursed by his assistant Carol Rosen, who spent a lot of time with the old Werner von Braun in the 1970s. Years after his death, she revealed some strange things that he told her shortly before his death.
The strategy that Werner von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie. He didn't mention a timeline, but he said that it was going to be speeding up faster than anybody could possibly imagine. That the effort to put weapons in space was not only based on a lie, but would accelerate past the point of people even understanding it until it was already up there and too late.
I find it very interesting that Werner von Braun found the idea of asteroids amusing, as if it were a ridiculous joke. Because that's what they are. He knew about our cosmology, like all the bigwigs at NASA, and left a note on his tombstone referencing Psalm 19 verse 1. And I quote, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament sheweth his handiwork." Isn't it strange that a rocket scientist from NASA refers to biblical cosmology and a firmament created by God? Okay, so let's assume that's how it's going to happen. I don't know, of course, this is a hypothetical scenario. The city of heaven could land in Siberia, and the forces that shouldn't be could perform a psyop of gigantic proportions to simulate an extraterrestrial threat to humanity. They would use holograms, flying objects built by humans but largely unknown to humanity, and a political and media propaganda campaign to create the illusion. I really hate to do this on this channel, but we need to talk about geopolitics for a moment. I think at the end of this pole shift, the blue plasma beam will shoot up from the rupees Niagara at the North Pole and the dome will break. In case you haven't noticed the obvious yet, they called it Project Blue Beam, because that is the cue for the beginning of the operation. Once the cycle ends and another reset happens, a blue plasma beam will shoot out of the rupees Niagara towards the firmament above, triggering a couple things. On the screen you see just a few of the dozens of examples I know in which we are shown the tree of life reappearing at the end of Satan's little time and initiating the final battle. By then, a Third World War will be underway in which the geographical points where the Saints land will be declared enemy territory. Which countries are these? Russia and nearby China, of course. Few people will have a problem attacking an enemy spaceship in Siberia with nuclear bombs and directed energy weapons. Nobody lives in this ice tundra. The entire Western world has been conditioned to hate the political leadership of this country. And the Earth has to be defended, after all. The landing area which I am speculating about lies right in the center of the so-called Arc of Tensions, so it is completely surrounded by armed zones, conflict regions, military bases and launching pads. The Arc of Tensions is a theory of geopolitics. According to this theory, the world can be dominated by conquering the center of the Eurasian continent. This conquest is created by military tensions in an arc around this point, similar to tectonic movements of the Earth's crust. And indeed, the majority of all military conflicts since the Second World War, especially those of the United States, have taken place in the Arc of Tension. This is no coincidence. The human suffering and the number of human sacrifices that these wars have caused in Satan's little time is immeasurable, and I am sure it breaks Jesus Christ's heart to see us being taken over by darkness again and again. Of course, all these areas are now also dotted with US military and NATO bases. And they all have their eyes on Russia. But could the global geopolitical chess game really be the biggest smoking mirror in history? Who is the real enemy in the bigger geopolitical planning? I don't know, but let's follow a few more clues. In the last few years, China has built several nuclear bomb silos in the north of the country on the border with Mongolia, as the US geopolitics expert shows in this video from the Wall Street Journal. They want to be able to attack the USA via the North Pole with these missiles.
You can see here that the arc of the 3 silo fields is designed to launch missiles over the North Pole and to the continental United States.
All this could give Beijing the military capability to deter Washington from engaging China militarily in the event of an invasion of Taiwan.
The USA has similar missile silos in Alaska with Fort Greely. What if the real target is actually the North Pole itself? The military bases in the far north probably have the North Pole as their target, such as the Thule Air Base in northern Greenland, where the US Space Force is currently stationed, or the Russian Air Force Base on Alexander Land, the northernmost military base in the world. Russia has also recently come into possession of large parts of the North Pole. Russia has by far the most military bases in the region, 3 times more than NATO, the most missile silos, the most troops trained for the Arctic, and the largest icebreaker fleet in the world. If you position Russia as an enemy, you also make the Arctic Circle an enemy territory. Will a future big military conflict eventually shift there? There are thousands of reasons for militarizing the region that could be given to the lower classification levels of the military and secret services. For example, the protection of the important Arctic trade route, in which Russia and China are currently investing heavily, or the fight for the oil reserves under the ice. These have so far been left alone to protect the Arctic environment, but this could change in the event of war or the melting of the ice caps. The preparations for the final battle in Satan's little time are underway. Another thing that struck me on the subject, Sergei Anatolievich Torop. This guy founded a religious cult and built an eco-village in the middle of the Siberian taiga. The disciples who gathered around him seriously believed he was Jesus Christ, who had now returned. This Last Testament church, founded in 1991, had 4,000 followers at its peak, all of whom lived in this village in the middle of nowhere, which they also referred to as the New Jerusalem. In 2020, he was arrested and detained by the Russian Secret Service. Was this whole thing a psyop or predictive programming? So that the idea of the New Jerusalem in Siberia is linked to this insane story? Who knows? While I was playing around with this idea, I remembered another anomaly in Siberia, the Tunguska event. On June 30th, 1908, a gigantic explosion occurred in the middle of Siberia. It is one of the most powerful explosions in recorded human history. Over an area of 2,000 square kilometers, 60 million trees were blown down. At a distance of 500 kilometers, you could still see a bright flash of fire and feel a rumble of thunder. In villages 65 kilometers away, windows and doors were smashed in. The shock was even measurable in Potsdam, 5,000 kilometers away, and even in Washington, D.C. As it happened in the middle of nowhere, there were no fatalities. For many days after, the skies over Europe and Asia burned bright, some people claiming to be able to read the newspaper at night. In California, the Mount Wilson Observatory noted that atmospheric transparency was very low for months, with an unusual amount of dust particles filling the air. Whatever had happened in Siberia was more powerful than anyone could have imagined. Due to the political conditions at the time, it was not until the 1920s that the incident became known worldwide, and it was not until 1927 that the first scientific investigations were carried out. To this day, the phenomenon remains a mystery, and there are various scientific hypotheses and fringe theories as to the cause of the explosion. The scientific hypotheses range from an asteroid or meteorite impact, but no remnants have ever been found and there was no crater, to a magma explosion from the ground. In my opinion, meteoroids do not exist, at least not in the way we are told. Among the fringe theories is Nikola Tesla's death ray, which he allegedly shot towards the Arctic for testing purposes in 1908, but only hit Siberia. Other theories include UFOs and extraterrestrial weapons. So I don't know, I just find it strange that something gigantic could have landed in Siberia, the potential landing site for the New Jerusalem. Basically, Lucifer will try to accomplish this time what he couldn't last time because Jesus and the Archangel Michael got in his way. Of course, such a hero can only be the Messiah, who is fighting the Antichrist here. The misinterpretation of the Book of Revelation is therefore an integral part of the deception to mobilize humanity into the final battle. But in reality, it is Lucifer himself in human form who is switching roles here. It will be irresistible to fall for the lie, because he will probably even bring peace overnight, and thanks to the high technologies the black budget sector has held back so far, cure many of our diseases, clean up the environment, and stop manipulating the weather, which will be sold as the climate rescue, all in a short space of time. But of course there is also a narrative needed for non-religious people, which is much easier. A non-religious person does not expect supernatural occurrences and has no understanding of them. So they don't know what they mean or how they can and should react to them. So the shock effect will be much greater in the final battle. Their minds will not be able to process what they perceive, and many will probably fall into a state of shock or blind panic. In such a state, the mind reaches for the nearest possible or already conditioned explanation. You would only know something like this from science fiction movies or video games, and there it is, mostly aliens from another spinning top marble of the open vacuum. One would blindly trust the instructions of the government in order to feel a certain hold and to bring some order into the chaos, completely unaware that the leaders of these governments themselves are causing this chaos. It would seem more than logical and rational for the UN to appoint a military general to lead all the militaries of the world to defeat the common enemy and neutralize the threat to humanity. This humanity unifying effect of an alien threat was mentioned by US President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s multiple times.
I couldn't help at one point in my discussions privately with General Secretary Gorbachev, when you stop to think that we're all God's children wherever we may live in the world, I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together. Well, I don't suppose we can wait for some alien race to come down and threaten us. but I think that between us we can bring about that realization. In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war? I think maybe I'd answer it this way. I keep, in my frustration sometimes, actually, if you count some of the things going on in smaller countries and all, there have been about 114 wars since World War II. But I've often wondered, what if all of us in the world discovered that we were threatened by a power from outer space, from another planet? Wouldn't we all of a sudden find that we didn't have any differences between us at all? We were all human beings, citizens of the world, and wouldn't we come together to fight that particular threat?
But what if this so-called threat is a lie? What if it is just a threat for a tiny minority of people, and it is actually the salvation for most people if they wouldn't be deceived? If you think about it, the alien attack was the original psyop. So on October 30th, 1938, there was a radio show in the US in which a fictional alien attack was played so realistically as a news report, a radio play on H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, performed by Orson Welles, that mass hysteria and panic was triggered across the country. As the General Education Board, the sister philanthropy of the Rockefeller Foundation, extensively researched the effects of this mass panic in relation to the power of disinformation in mass media, it is now rumored that the Rockefellers themselves commissioned the whole thing to test the effect of psychological operations through mass media. Okay, what I have to say now is probably too much for some people. I'm not asking anyone to believe any of this. I'm just sharing my opinion after years of researching the fringe. What does Gog and Magog mean in Revelation chapter 20 verses 7 to 8?
And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea.
Whoever or whatever Gog and Magog are, they are led in numbers like sand on the beach by Satan into the final battle. They symbolize widespread rebellion against God's rule led by Satan after his release from imprisonment. One thing that is important, this gathering of large numbers of people from all nations of the earth, in all four corners of the earth, is preceded by deception. Satan must therefore manage to deceive all the people in order to get them to fight in the last battle. And then they throw the words Gog and Magog into the middle of it, as if they were paradoxically synonymous with the deceived nations whose number is like the sand of the sea. Let me try to make sense of that. Let's go back to Scripture. How does it continue?
And they went up on the breadth of the earth, and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven, and devoured them.
They came up to the breadth of the earth. Breadth means width. So these billions of these Gog and Magog spread across the whole earth. From where did they come up from? I assume that many of my viewers are familiar with the concept of Nephilim spirits. They are the Nephilim giants from the Old Testament who were wiped out by God with the great flood. According to the Book of Jubilees, 90% of their souls were put into the abyss and held captive there. But their leader Mastema, who is later equated with Satan in the text, negotiates a deal with God. 10% of these giants are allowed to remain on earth under his control as disembodied spirits in order to lead people astray. God agrees to this deal. The Book of Jubilees thus provides an explanation as to why demons exist and are allowed to torture us. This abyss of condemnation, where most of the Nephilim spirits are trapped, is typically inaccessible to us humans. But that doesn't mean that some won't try to gain access by opening bodily or other portals.
And in the 3rd week of this Jubilee, the unclean demons began to lead astray the children of the sons of Noah, and to make to err and destroy them. And the sons of Noah came to Noah their father, and they told him concerning the demons which were leading astray and binding and slaying his sons' sons. And he prayed before the Lord his God and said, God of the spirits of all flesh, who has shown mercy unto me, and has saved me and my sons from the waters of the flood, and has not caused me to perish as thou didst the sons of perdition. For thy grace hath been great towards me, and great hath been thy mercy to my soul. Let thy grace be lift up upon my sons, and let not wicked spirits rule over them, lest they should destroy them from the earth. But do thou bless me and my sons, that we may increase and multiply and replenish the earth. And thou knowest how thy watchers, the fathers of these spirits, acted in my day. And as for these spirits which are living, imprison them and hold them fast in the place of condemnation. And let them not bring destruction on the sons of thy servant, my God. For these are malignant and created in order to destroy. And let them not rule over the spirits of the living, for thou alone can exercise dominion over them. And let them not have power over the sons of the righteous from henceforth and forevermore. And the Lord our God bade us to bind all. And the chief of the spirits, Mastema, came and said, Lord Creator, let some of them remain before me, and let them hearken to my voice, and do all that I shall say unto them. For if some of them are not left to me, I shall not be able to execute the power of my will on the sons of men. For these are for corruption and leading astray before my judgment. For great is the wickedness of the sons of men. And he said, Let the 10th part of them remain before him, and let 9 parts descend into the place of condemnation. And one of us he commanded that we should teach Noah all their medicines, for he knew that they would not walk in uprightness nor strive in righteousness. And we did according to all his words. All the malignant evil ones we bound in the place of condemnation, and a 10th part of them we left, that they might be subject before Satan on the earth. And we explained to Noah all the medicines of their diseases, together with their seductions, how he might heal them with herbs of the earth. And Noah wrote down all things in a book, as we instructed him, concerning every kind of medicine. Thus the evil spirits were precluded from hurting the sons of Noah.
Okay, so who is Gog and Magog? The Wikipedia article summarizes it as a pair of names that appear in the Bible and the Quran and are attributed to different people, tribes, or countries. So it is not clear what they are. Part of the confusion stems from the fact that Gog and Magog probably originated from Gog from Magog, so Magog describes a place, but over time it became 2 people. In addition to the Book of Revelation, Gog and Magog are also mentioned in the Book of Ezekiel. In this prophecy, Gog and Magog are described as leaders of hordes that will threaten the restored Israel, but would be destroyed by God. The theme that Gog and Magog were a barbarian people, or at least their kings, runs through various sources and interpretations. Among the most popular are the Scythians, the Huns, the Turks, the Khazaran, the Mongols, and the Tartars. In other words, mainly nomadic peoples of the Eurasian continent. I find it particularly interesting how in many stories Gog and Magog are trapped behind a wall or in a mountain. For example, 2 chapters of the Quran describe how the Yajuj and Majuj, Gog and Magog, were suppressed by Du al-Qarnayn, which means the 2-horned one. Dul-Qarnayn, having journeyed to the ends of the world, meets a people who barely understood a word who seek his help in building a barrier that will separate them from the people of Yajuj and Majuj who do great mischief on earth. He agrees to build it for them, but warns that when the time comes, referring to the last age, God will remove the barrier. The Alexander Romance of Pseudo-Callisthenes describes gates constructed by Alexander the Great between two mountains called the Breasts of the North. The mountains are initially 18 feet apart and the pass is rather wide, but Alexander's prayers to God causes the mountains to draw nearer, thus narrowing the pass. There he builds the Caspian gates out of bronze, coating them with fast-sticking oil. The gates enclose 22 nations and their monarchs, including Gog and Magog, therein called Goth and Magoth. The geographic location of these mountains is rather vague, described as a 50-day march away northwards after Alexander put to flight his Belserian enemies. The Alexander Romance is a fascinating piece of writing, and is considered the most successful bestseller of antiquity. It has been translated and expanded into dozens of languages. It describes a journey around the world by Alexander the Great, the content of which sounds so fantastic that today's historians dismiss it as pure fiction. It even describes something like a submarine, centuries before they got invented. He travels towards the North Star to the land of the blessed to find the fountain of life, a mythological water that is said to bestow immortality when consumed. In my opinion, this is only the plasma at North Pole and the camp of the saints. To reach the land of the blessed, he has to cross the land of eternal darkness, which sounds even more like the polar night. But I digress. What's the deal with the wall that imprisons Gog and Magog? Could Gog and Magog be referring to the Nephilim giants of the past? Perhaps the wall is the Great Wall of China. Could this excessively high wall have been built to keep monsters or giants out of the area known as Tartary? Possibly, at least this concept is shown to us time and time again in pop culture. The live-action movie, as bad as it was, did a good job of portraying the horror that was the Nephilim giants. Notice the Joker-like grin. But what if this wall is just symbolic of a wall that separates dimensions, and when this wall is torn down at the end of time, the Nephilim spirits trapped in this dimension can re-enter our world. And these disembodied spirits possess large parts of humanity, and go to war against the camp of the saints in a number of billions, just like sand on the sea. The scenario just described is basically the zombie apocalypse. Think about it: black eyes, violent, a strange way of moving, as if the body is controlled by something that is no longer used to a physical body. The typical pop culture image of a zombie is remarkably similar to that of the demon-possessed. Of the hundreds of zombie films in which this concept has been pushed in recent years, one in particular has caught my eye. In the movie World War Z, a pathogen spreads that turns people into bloodthirsty zombies in a matter of seconds. At the end of the movie, the rest of the surviving humanity entrenches itself behind high walls in the city of Jerusalem. In my opinion, this is symbolic of the encirclement of the camp of the saints in the New Jerusalem by the Gog and Magog, who attack here in numbers like sand on the sea. In the movie, the final battle takes place in Jerusalem. But the occult symbolism of the cover makes it clear that this is about the final battle at the black plasma volcano Rupes Nigra, where the camp of the saints is located.
and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them.
This video was really all over the place. Let me remind you again. This is pure speculation. Sorry it took me so long to upload another video. I hope I can be better in the future. Thanks for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel to be notified of future uploads. If you like my work, you can support me. The links are in the video description. Thank you to my Patreons for the support. I look forward to your comments. See you next time and God bless.